Hey everybody, Jim Ryan just stepped down as the head of PlayStation. Don't know if you've heard about it. And it came as a wild surprise to pretty much everyone. But is it a sign of bad things to come or a correction to a fundamentally broken leadership structure? Let's look at it. So this news was originally broken by Jason Schreier, who everyone probably mostly knows for blocking people on Twitter, but also is a reporter formerly from Kotaku, but now at Bloomberg. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, he said that Jim Ryan would be retiring, and then like a couple hours later, PlayStation came out with the official statement, and Jim Ryan had said, after 30 years, I have made the decision to retire from SIE in March of 2024. I have relished the opportunity to have a job I love and a very special company, working with great people and incredible partners, but I found it increasingly difficult to reconcile living in Europe and working in North America. So, a couple of things to point out here is he says that he's retiring in March of 2024, so he isn't actually gone yet. However, he's immediately not the head of SIE. He's already been removed from his position and replaced by Hiroki Totoki, who comes from the PlayStation side of things and famously said that the way forward for them was to pivot to making mobile games. So hopefully he doesn't stick around for too long, but he's just there. Hiroki is just there as an interim person to sort of fill that gap while they look for a new person, which admittedly does feel really weird if Jim Ryan is still working there. Like, he's not actually retiring until March, so I don't really understand why he can't continue to do his job until then and why they have to bring this other guy in temporarily. Like, I'm sure there's reasons for it, I just don't know what they are, and it kind of confuses me, to be honest. But it's confusing to me because it's like the only reason I can think of why they might have wanted him immediately out of the position is either because he was bad at his job or because the retirement wasn't like a real thing. And I know that that's like a tinfoil hat thing that's been going around where everyone's like, oh, I bet he was actually fired. But it is a little suspicious that, like, first of all, the travel reason feels a little bit weak, right? Because he's out saying that he doesn't want to travel between the UK and North America, but he's the boss. If he didn't want to travel, he could just not do that. You know what I mean? Like, they already moved the head of PlayStation from Japan to the UK specifically to cater to him. If he didn't want to travel, like, we have so much technology now, he doesn't need to go in person to do whatever he's doing in North America. He could just work. You know what I mean? So I don't really understand that excuse at all. And then it is also just like I said, it's weird that they're not allowing him to sort of work out the rest of the time that he's still at the company. It really feels like they're just trying to put somebody else in the position to like sort of start cleaning up whatever mess he's made. It doesn't really matter is what it comes down to. I don't know whether the retirement was real or not, and I don't actually really care. I'm personally just glad he's gone. In my opinion, this is the best thing that could have happened to PlayStation. And I know that some people are probably going to look at my body of content on YouTube and the fact that I'm on a podcast called the Xbox Factor Podcast and probably think like, oh, he just wants to see PlayStation burn. That's not at all the case. I own a PlayStation 5. I really enjoy my PlayStation 5. I think that they make really good content, but I do think that in the tenure of Jim Ryan, they've made a lot of decisions that I really, really hate. And so hopefully whoever comes in after him will correct those things. I wouldn't expect it to like 180 in a year or two. It's going to probably take a lot of work, but you know, I think this is a good thing overall. So this is good for me. Because Jim Ryan was just kind of a mess, right? Not only was he a PR nightmare, I mean, it felt like there was a time period there where every time he opened his mouth, he said something he really should not have, right? And it really runs the gamut. It was we believe in generations. It was who wants to play old games. It was probably most famously the thing where after Roe v. Wade got overturned, he was like, let's all respect each other's opinions. Some people are right. Everyone's right and nobody's wrong. But nobody say anything publicly about how they actually feel about this. And also, it was my cat's birthday. Let's talk about my cat instead. I'm thinking about maybe getting a dog. And everyone was like, bro, stop. Like, this is a very important thing to a lot of people. I don't want to talk about your cat right now. Like Like, dude, chill, right? Like, that was a whole mess. And then, of course, there's the entire previous, like, year and change where he's been flying all over the globe telling everyone how weak PlayStation is and how doomed they will be without Call of Duty because of the ABK deal, which of course I think we can all pretty much assume that he knew he was lying, because also there were the emails that came out after the fact where like he was telling people internally that he didn't actually believe any of the stuff he was saying, so he was just lying on the stand, which is also maybe a reason why he shouldn't be in charge anymore, because like if you're lying in court, then that's just not something that's going to reflect well for you going forward. So again, it, people have been saying for a while that basically since this news came out that whoever takes over for Jim Ryan is going to have big shoes to fill, but it really does feel like those shoes are actually like Crocs full of piss, where it's really not about filling the shoes, it's about cleaning up after the mess those shoes have made. So let's look at Jim Ryan's entire tenure as head of PlayStation, because we're not going to look at his entire 30-year career, because frankly that's a lot of work and I don't want to do that, but he's actually only been head of PlayStation since April 1st of 2019, right after the ousting of Sean Layden's administration. Which, by the way, can we just sidetrack for a second and talk about how weird that is? Like, the PS4 is, I think, inarguably the generation that most people look at as like the golden achievement of PlayStation right now. Like, the PlayStation 2 was great, but they didn't really have to compete very much back then. PlayStation 4 was really what turned PlayStation into what we think of when we think of PlayStation now. It was that big, blockbuster movie thing with a smattering of smaller, sort of weirder games to fill in the gaps, right? They did a great job, that administration. Sean Layden, Shuhei Yoshida, Adam Boyes, they killed it. And now they're all kind of gone. Sean Layden, of course, was famously pushed out of the company, and was not retired. Like, he didn't even get an official statement about it, but we've heard from multiple people since then that he was forced out of his role. We heard that for years now, so that's very strange to think about. And then Shuhei has been sort of banished to the indie realm, and Adam Boyes is just, I think he's the head of like a really small studio now. It's like Sumo Digital. Is it Sumo Digital? I don't know. It's one of them, right? So it's the guys who made the Killer Instinct game, weirdly enough. But he's no longer even at PlayStation. So kind of that whole administration is just gone now and replaced by Jim Ryan, in what was possibly the weirdest April Fool's prank of all time. But since he only took over in April of 2019, that means that his time as head of PlayStation is mostly defined by the lifetime of the PlayStation 5. And the PlayStation 5 has been very successful. I would make the argument that it's sort of coasting on the success of the PlayStation 4, and it's definitely coasting on the games of the previous administration, because Jim Ryan hasn't even been head of PlayStation for the entire dev cycle of a single game yet, meaning every single game that has come out since he was president would have been things that were greenlight by the previous group. So we haven't even really seen what first party under Jim Ryan looks like, although we're starting to get some not great glimpses at what that is going to be. And we'll talk about that later. But regardless, it's still wildly successful, right? It's selling a ton of units. People are reviewing their games very highly. Like, PlayStation is doing very well right now. We did also, as another negative point, I'm trying to not be too negative, but as another negative point, we did also recently find out that PlayStation is the least profitable of the console manufacturers, weirdly enough, despite the fact that I think they are still like the industry leaders. Like, we all think of PlayStation as like the top of the stack for video games, even though I think Nintendo sells more than them and Xbox makes more money than them. So it's a strange situation, right? But there's no denying that the PlayStation 5 has been wildly successful. And while I believe that has mostly been coasting on the back of the previous administration, there is at least something to be said about not messing that up. Because we've seen in the past people mess up console launches. All of the big three have done it at least once now. And so good job on not screwing that up. Some of the things that he's done that I didn't like were that he's raised the price on pretty much everything. He raised the price on his video games, which granted he was not the first person in the industry to do that. I think that was EA or something. And pretty much the rest of the industry has followed since, so I can't really pin him for that, but he did do it. He also raised the price of his consoles for what I think was the first time that that had ever happened in history. So that's pretty cool. He also made revisions to that console that made it both cheaper to make and worse to own, because he took out like huge chunks of the heatsink, which means that literally the console will not last as long, which is really cool. Really love to see that. So he's saving a lot of money making it and still charging people more to buy it is just a really fun combination of things. And then, of course, he's recently raised the price of PS Plus by a very high amount. We're talking about like $40 annual. And this is coming after a restructuring that made the service arguably worse. Definitely not better, but arguably worse. It just added nothing to the service to make up for that price until a while after he's just recently added that the higher tiers of PlayStation Plus now have access to a catalog of movies, which, if you remember from like the Xbox One launch, everyone was like, TV, stop talking about that, we want to talk about the games. But now it's like, oh, well, you add this catalog of movies to our subscription service, and now like everyone's kind of okay with that. I don't know, it's weird. There's a lot of like give and take, as you can see from Jim Ryan's tenure here. He's also launched some failed hardware. The PS5, wildly successful. PSVR 2, not so much. There has been a decent amount of support for it in terms of games, but I think we've been seeing a lot of people just not really interested in it. It's not selling the way that I think they want it to, and generally it seems like people still don't think of it as like one of the go-to places for VR. It seems like that's still pretty heavily the MetaQuest. But whatever. There was also the PlayStation Portal, which is now the third handheld that could be given the moniker PSP, although it is probably the worst one of those because it's exclusively a streaming device. Like, you cannot have anything native on it. There's no PSP games or anything like that. Or Portal games, I guess I should say. It's basically, it's just another way to sort of like screen share your PlayStation 5 while like your kid takes over the TV or something. Like, it has a use case, but it's an extremely small use case, so I don't see it being successful long term. So I'm not really sure why they bothered. And then in my opinion, one of the biggest things that he did was he has dramatically changed the way that first party looks in terms of PlayStation, and I would not say for the better. So he's closed a number of studios. He closed Japan Studios, he closed Manchester Studio, and he closed Pixel Opus. So that's basically the entirety of their AA catalog just sort of gone. We still have Media Molecule, but honestly, we've seen a lot of departures from them, so who knows how long they will last. Hopefully long, but who's to say. He's turned Sony Bend into a support studio, in that people have jokingly but more seriously called Sony Bend Naughty Dog North. Apparently they're working on a single player game of their own now, but he did, by doing that even for the time that he did, cause the studio head and a bunch of the leadership to pretty much just do a whole exodus from that studio, which is not great for them. And then he replaced those studios with a slew of very strange purchases, some very good, but mostly very strange. He bought Firesprite and Fabric, who Fabric is just a support team for Firesprite, but they're both making VR titles, although I think the only one that we've seen so far was that Call of the Mountain game, and I don't know that anyone really popped off for that especially, but it did come out, so they're doing something. He bought Nixxes to port their games to PC, which is a good idea, although I don't really know why they need a discrete team to do that. He bought Firewalk, who's currently working on Concord, that games as a service game that we have all kind of forgotten about already, because it's just like another one of those. And Haven, who's doing Fair Games, that's in the exact same area. I honestly, on the top of my head right now, could not tell you which trailer was for Fair Games and which one was for Concord. I think Fair Games was the one where it was like, oh, we gotta do hits against like the big companies, man. We gotta take it to the man, dude. I think it was that one, but I honestly do not remember with any confidence. They bought Savage Game Studios to make mobile games. They bought Valkyrie Entertainment as just a support studio. And then a handful of actually good purchases. They bought Housemarque, who I think makes bad games. I really don't like anything they've ever made, but other people do, so it was a good purchase on their part. They bought Bluepoint, who makes remakes, which is not the most exciting thing in the world, but the remakes they make are very good, so there is that. They bought Bungie, who they vastly overpaid for, and all of their games are not going to be exclusive. And also, Bungie's been like going around killing off other games as a service games that other studios have been making because they've been like given free reign to dictate what is and is not good enough to hit market, even though currently Destiny is in like the worst shape it's been in since the launch of Destiny, according to people who actually play Destiny. I don't, but like Lord Cognito was saying that it's in like the worst state it's ever been in right now. So it's really funny that on top of that, they're also like being judge, jury, and executioner for other people's games when they may or may not know what they're doing, and also are currently being sued for potentially being racist, which is really exciting time to be a Bungie employee, I would say. And then their most famous, probably best purchase, no, not even probably, unarguably best purchase, is they bought Insomniac, who I guess probably they didn't need to buy. They were going to make PlayStation exclusive games regardless, but Insomniac has been hard carrying the PS5 since its launch, so definitely a good purchase there. But yeah, first party looking dramatically different as compared to when Jim Ryan took over as head of SIE. Probably the most worrying way in which Jim Ryan has changed first party is with his new push for games as a service, for live service games. And it's not that he wants games as a service, because I think that is something that they need. I think we've been saying for a long time that PlayStation needs multiplayer games. They need games that can sort of bring in that returning revenue, because they have sort of fallen into that trap of making a lot of games that are really similar. And I know that like that gets overly used against them, because like Ghost of Tsushima and Last of Us are clearly very different games, but they are sort of that same genre, if that makes sense. Like they are very much like those action adventure third person, like, you know, they fit into a similar mold but do very different things within that mold, if that makes sense. Anyway, they've needed to sort of expand on that, and especially into the realm of multiplayer and games as a service, because that's where a lot of money comes from in video games, if you didn't know. The problem here, I think, is that they're doing too much, pretty much, is what it comes down to. Jim Ryan has said in his own internal documentation that by 2025, they want to pivot so that 60% of their budget for first party is going into games as a service games, which is a really fast turnaround for a studio family that has traditionally not done anything like that. I guess they did buy Bungie, so like that's going to be part of that budget, and they pretty much exclusively have done games as a service and live service games. So that's counting towards it for sure. And then obviously like Fair Games and Concord, that goes into that too. So they're not asking for a complete turnaround, but it is a large amount of their teams switching over, and I think it's too much too fast. Because they're also saying that they want to have more than 10 of them launch before March of 2026, which I'm just going to throw this out there right now. I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't. That's only a couple of years from now, and having 10 games out in this platform by then is not going to work. And even if it does work, most of them will fail because it's already sort of too late to be launching a bunch of games as a service games. Because when you're putting out a live service game, you can't just be a good game. You have to be good enough to pull people away from a different games as a service game, because there's only so much time in a day, and so people who are playing Fortnite are not going to put that time into Concord. People who are playing Apex are not going to put that time into Fair Games, right? Like it's just there's an inherent competition between just the time that is being spent on these games, and so they're also going to be competing with each other. If you're putting out 10 in 3 years, like inherently the majority of these will fail. It's just 100% how that is going to work, and it's unfortunate, but I guess they're just hoping that one of them will stick. I don't know, I guess we'll see if it works out for them, but I'm not expecting much. And also, while they have bought a lot of other teams to make live service games, it does seem like they have also asked their existing teams to at least add live service elements, because we've been hearing in the background that teams like Naughty Dog and Guerrilla and Insomniac have also been asked to make live service, at least part of the games that they're making. And we've heard that they're very uncomfortable with that and that they don't want to do it. So hopefully they'll roll it back so that at least those teams don't have to make live service games, because like Insomniac is not about that. Guerrilla is not about that. I mean, they made the Killzone games, I guess, Guerrilla, but that was ages ago. I think the team's very different by now. And the Naughty Dogs, I mean, they did Factions, but also right now Factions 2 is on ice and just like not doing well. It's a whole story. I'm not going to get into it, Factions 2, but basically Factions 2 was one of the games that seems like it was killed by Bungie. And so I at this point don't think we'll see Factions 2, because apparently it just wasn't good enough, which is worrying, right? Also, we've seen since Jim Ryan's departure that apparently high-ranking people in the PlayStation Sony group are already thinking that the live service push was a mistake. They're already thinking like this might not pay off in the way we want it to. We've seen multiple articles to this effect. So hopefully they're rolling back on that. But it's all to say, like, this is another mess that I think Jim Ryan has made. And it's not that it was a bad idea. It was just that they went way too hard into it all at once. And doing this, I think, has also resulted in sort of a dry spell in PlayStation's first party. Which I know sounds crazy, because PlayStation's first party is like the thing that they're known for, and they consistently kill it with that. But if you look at their track record since the launch of the PS5, there's some weird questions that get brought up, right? So let's do that, right? In 2020, when they launched the PlayStation 5, it had 4 first-party launch titles, being Astro's Playroom, which was a very small packed-in game that I enjoyed, but it was not something that was like a system seller or anything. Like it was fine, but it was a demo. You know, it was like here's a way to look at the new technology of the controller and the box and stuff, and like that's neat, but it's not like it's not going to be winning awards really or anything, like, you know what I mean? Like it's just not something that you're buying a console for. Then they had the Demon's Soul remake, which I guess technically at the time wasn't first party because they hadn't bought Bluepoint yet, but I'm counting it anyway because they own them now. Which it is just a remake. It's a really good, well-made remake of, I think, probably the worst Souls game. But that is something. It was something good to have. Sackboy: A Big Adventure came out that same year. I don't think it was a launch title. I think it was like a couple weeks later. I might be wrong on that. But I hate that game. I think that game's really awful. And then they had Spider-Man Miles Morales, which people like to detract from it, saying that it was a DLC, which it did start its life as a DLC. And in some ways you can tell because it is very much a smaller game. But I think that they made it worthwhile. I think they made that a full game and did a good job with that. So I would say of the 4, really in the launch window, you're looking at Miles Morales. Like that's your system seller right there. I don't think anyone's buying it for Sackboy. I don't think anyone's buying it for Demon's Souls. You know what I mean? So that's your first party. There were other things that were in there, like there was that Demolition Derby one that I can't remember the name of right now, but that was not first party. It was made by an outside team, and I don't think they own the IP. Also, I don't think they would want to take credit for it because it was awful. So a pretty solid launch lineup, though, all things considered, because that's only, I mean, it came out in November, so those were all in the last 2 months of 2020. So they did well there, but it kind of immediately starts falling off, right? Because we see in 2022, they only put out 3 first-party games, and it was MLB The Show 21, which also launched day one into Xbox's Game Pass, which made it objectively the better place to play it on Xbox, because you could get it as part of the service instead of paying full price for it, because they also didn't put it into their own service, which I always thought was weird. I don't know why they didn't do that. Then they put out Returnal, which I hated. I thought it was an awful game, but other people liked it, so I don't know, maybe. And Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which was a good game, but it is a smaller game. Again, I don't think that Ratchet & Clank is a system seller, and I know Returnal is not a system seller. So 2021 was kind of a dry year for their first party. Then we come to 2022, which on paper was an amazing year. Probably their best year in a long time, right? Because we had Horizon Forbidden West, which is a phenomenal game. I really loved it. Gran Turismo 7, which was pretty hit and miss. I think a lot of people hold against it that it had microtransactions, and apparently it was quite buggy. But it's still held up as a decent game. People seem to like it. There was MLB The Show 22, of course, which again launched into Game Pass, and it was the exact same situation there. And then God of War Ragnarok, which was, a huge Game of the Year contender. People generally loved it. It was a good game. I really love that game. So they had a lot of really big games coming out in 2022. The weird thing about it is every single one of those games, except their annual baseball title, MLB The Show, was originally announced to be coming out in 2021 and then was delayed until 2022, which does make it look like the only game that they were going to put out in 2022 was MLB The Show. So then you start thinking, like, whatever would have been planned in 2022 must have gotten pushed till 2023, right? Like they probably just pushed whatever was going to come out that year to the next year to make room so they didn't like conflict with each other, because again, people only have so much time and so much money to spend on games in a given time. But 2023 is their lightest year yet, and by a lot. Because this year, all we've gotten is 2023. This year, all we've gotten is Horizon Call of the Mountain, a VR title that people forgot about like the second it was announced because it was VR, so no one really talked about it. MLB The Show 23, which again was in Game Pass, and Marvel Spider-Man 2, which looks like it's going to be phenomenal. It hasn't come out yet as I'm recording this, although it comes out pretty soon. Looks like it's going to be great, but that's their only real first-party game of 2023 that I think is going to be, a blockbuster that's going to really show people what PlayStation is known for. And that's really weird when you think of the fact that all of the games from the previous year had been delayed from 2021. So it's like if 2021 was delayed till 2022, then you would have assumed that the things in 2022 would have been pushed in 2023, but there's nothing here in 2023. So where are those things? So then you start asking the question of like, were those games that actually ever thought that they were going to come out in 2021? Or did they just say that because they knew that 2021 was kind of a light year, and so they lied and said that God of War Ragnarok and Horizon were going to come out that year to make it look more exciting because it was right at the launch of the PlayStation 5? Or is it a situation where the games that were coming out in 2022 are not coming together right? Or is that the start of this games as a service push and they've been like slowly canceled or something? You know what I mean? Like what is the situation right here? Because they're not really communicating with us. That's another huge thing that I really hate about the Jim Ryan administration of PlayStation, is they just don't tell us anything about what to expect for the future in terms of games, in terms of services, really on any level. They're not showing up to showcases or like industry events, and when they do, like this year, their big PlayStation showcase was kind of a flop, and then they did another state of play later that was also a flop. Like they have just not been showing up in the way that we expect them to, considering that they haven't done a show. The showcase they did this year was the first time they had done a showcase in 2 years, maybe 3, depending on how you count it. And yet they had nothing really to show. And so it's starting to get a little concerning, because right now we're in October of 2023, nearly the end of 2023. And right now we do not know of a single first party game that is coming out in 2024. Like we have Helldivers 2 is supposed to come out in 2024, but that's not first party because it's not being made by a studio that they own. Even though they own the IP, it's being made by, I think it's Arrowhead or something, so it's a second party game, so I'm not counting that. And also it looks like it's a pretty mediocre game, so I don't know if they would even want to take credit for that anyway. People are saying Wolverine might come out in 2024, but it's absolutely not, because we saw that when Spider-Man 2 went gold that they started moving people from Spider-Man 2 to Wolverine. So like if they're moving high level people from this game just now over to Wolverine, it's not going to be done in a year. Like that's just not going to happen. We thought maybe Factions 2 would come out, but it's on ice. It's basically canceled, like we talked about earlier. And then people have also been saying that they think Ghost of Tsushima 2 is going to be coming out next year, and that game isn't even announced yet. So there's a lot of like hopeful wishing about what games are going to come out in 2024, when in reality we really just don't know. And so it's this really weird situation where the one of the big three that we think of the most when we think of like really high power first party games that really move the industry forward all of a sudden doesn't have those games. Like, what does that mean for them? And like, obviously, yeah, Nintendo's got amazing first party games that sell like crazy, but they're sort of in a different category. Like, they're not really pushing the industry forward. They're just like hanging out and doing their own thing, which is fine. And obviously people are responding well to it because they sell like crazy. But PlayStation is the one, when you think of like, what is the thing that PlayStation has going for them? It's their first party games. And now it's like, but where are those? You know what I mean? Because it just, there's so many questions that get raised where it's like, where were those games that were delayed, or that we are assuming were delayed? Where are the games going forward? How long can Insomniac basically hard carry the PlayStation 5, because they've put out 3 games in about 3 years, and no one else is really showing up anywhere near the same level. So it's just like, how much more do we have to rely on Insomniac? Like, they're really putting in all of the work for this generation so far. And it's starting to get a little spooky. And another really important aspect of Jim Ryan's time as head of PlayStation that we really need to talk about for this is how he handled the whole ABK situation, because he has spent the better part of the last year flying all around the globe telling everyone who will listen that PlayStation is weak and that they will go out of business if they don't have Call of Duty. Going on so far as to say that his first-party studios are incapable of making something that is good enough or big enough to compete with Call of Duty, to the point where they will literally go out of business or fail if they don't have Call of Duty on their platform, which is, of course, ridiculous, because PlayStation makes some of the best games in the industry, and also Call of Duty isn't even leaving the platform. Like, it was never Microsoft's intention to take Call of Duty off of the platform, so he was just complaining for nothing. And he also still, even after all of that, right, going around complaining, kind of dragging PlayStation's name through the dirt and making them look really weak, which, if there is truth to him being removed and not retiring, which again, I don't know or care, but if he was asked to be asked to retire instead of like him retiring himself, this is probably the most likely reason for it, because even after all of that, he still completely failed. He didn't block the deal. He got a worse, he didn't block the acquisition from going through, I should say, and he ended up getting a worse deal than what he had been offered previously, because he wanted to continue to push to try and block it. Because at one point, Xbox was offering to put ABK games into PlayStation Plus and like do all this stuff, and they were really offering a lot to PlayStation at one point. And Jim Ryan said, I don't want a deal, I want to block this acquisition. And then down the road, it ended up going through anyway, despite Jim Ryan's best efforts. And now all he's got is a 10-year deal for Call of Duty, which is the exact same deal that Nintendo and everyone else on the planet has gotten. So all of his work and all of his flying amounted to actually literally nothing. And I've heard so many people being like, oh, he was just doing what he had to do. Like, this is his job. It is his job to try and block this deal. No, it's not. No, it's not. His job is to make his platform better and stronger and put out games, and they have not been doing that lately. He's been pivoting in a way that is really awful. We're seeing a dry spell. They're not showing up to community events. Like, it's a mess. It's a mess. So no, he hasn't been doing what he's been doing. He's been going out of his way to just try and do the one thing that he thinks he could do, and then even failing at that. It's awful. Like, if you fell in love with PlayStation during the PlayStation 4 era, if you liked the PlayStation 4 era of PlayStation, then you should love that Jim Ryan is leaving. But he has stayed just long enough to seemingly completely undermine the methodology that put PlayStation back on top during the PS4 generation. And I don't know if his successor is going to be able to turn that around, or if they'll even try to turn it around, because they might have a lot of the same ideas that Jim Ryan has. But even if they do try to turn around all this games of service stuff and like all of the mess that he's made, it's going to be a situation where, because Jim Ryan has left before any of the work that he's put in has actually come to fruition, all of the mess that he's made isn't going to see the light of day until a new person takes over, and then they'll probably get blamed for every mess that he's made. When this games as a service push doesn't work out, it's going to be whoever the new guy is who's getting blamed for it, even though it was entirely Jim Ryan's idea. And I think that's cowardice. I think he's leaving the company before the shit hits the fan that he threw, and someone else is going to catch the blame for it. And I think that's awful. I think it's really, really, really bad. It's going to make PlayStation look incredibly weak, even weaker than he's been making them look by flying around the country or the planet telling everyone how weak they are. And right now is a really bad time in gaming to be looking weak. We know that Apple and Google and Amazon and Tencent and the Saudi Arabia group are circling the industry for lions, or like lions, looking for a weakened straggler to pick off. And Jim Ryan just broke the legs of the fattest gazelle in the herd. So Jim Ryan's legacy at PlayStation, at least in my eyes, is price gouging the consumer, backing out of every industry event, and completely going silent to the point where we have no idea if PlayStation will put video games out in 2024, uprooting the PlayStation first party machine and completely changing what their entire methodology going forward is going to be, dragging PlayStation's name through the dirt on a global scale, and then running away before things start actually falling apart. Basically, he's like if a guy pooped the bed at a hotel and then pulled that bed up so that he could check out before housekeeping found it. And that is the legacy that Jim Ryan is leaving behind at PlayStation, and I really hope that they can course correct before it becomes a monumental issue, because I want to see PlayStation go back to what they were during the PS4. And they do need to adapt on some levels. They do need multiplayer games. They do need to start talking to the consumers more. They do probably need some live service games that will bring in continual revenue. There are things at PlayStation that need to be improved across the board already, but every single thing that Jim Ryan has done in his tenure as head of PlayStation was a negative thing. I cannot think of a single positive thing that he did other than not ruin the launch of the PlayStation 5. And if your biggest claim to fame is not dropping the ball when it has been handed to you by basically the LeBron James of the games industry, which was the PS4 generation, then really you don't have anything to be proud of at all. Maybe you disagree with me. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments down below. If you like this content, of course, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I will continue to put out more and more content like this going forward, so this will be the place to find it. So please share it with a friend, and until next time, I'll see you around.